The chandelier light shimmered across the marble floor of the hotel restaurant. A young waitress stood nervously beside a table where a powerful CEO signed papers worth millions. "You can't read that," he sneered, sliding a document toward her. "It's far beyond your pay grade." Her hands trembled, but her eyes didn't. When she finally picked up the pen and signed the paper, silence fell. Because the moment she did, the company stopped belonging to him. Elena Brooks had learned to make herself invisible. At 29, she moved through the Crystal Terrace restaurant with practiced grace, balancing champagne flutes and caviar appetizers for people who never learned her name. She was scenery, ambiance, part of the luxury experience that made the ultra-wealthy feel appropriately pampered. And that was fine with Elena. Invisibility meant safety, meant steady paychecks, meant she could pay for Sophie's daycare and keep their small apartment, and maybe someday afford to finish the degree she'd abandoned when she got pregnant at 20. The Crystal Terrace catered to the city's elite, tech executives, real estate moguls, investors who casually discussed million-dollar deals over $30 appetizers. But none were more regular, more demanding, more impossible to please than the Harrow Group. Every Thursday, they hosted private dinners in the restaurant's most exclusive room, discussions that shaped the city's economic landscape, while Elena refilled water glasses and tried not to exist too loudly. Victor Harrow was the kind of man who wore power like cologne, expensive, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. At 43, he'd built Harrow Group into a billion-dollar investment firm through what he called strategic aggression and what others whispered was ruthless destruction of anyone in his path. He had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, from growing up wealthy and becoming wealthier, from inhabiting a world where money could solve or silence any problem. This particular Thursday started like any other. Elena was assigned to the Harrow Group's private room, where Victor was hosting potential investors for what sounded like a major coastal development deal. She moved through her duties efficiently, wine poured, plates delivered, existence minimized, until she reached for Victor's glass and misjudged the angle. Red wine splashed across his sleeve, expensive fabric immediately staining. Elena's heart stopped, hands frozen in horror. She'd served thousands of meals without incident, and now she'd just ruined the suit of the city's most powerful CEO. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for a napkin. "I'll get that cleaned. I'll pay for—" Victor pulled his arm away, examining the damage with cold detachment. Then he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and smiled in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. "Figures," he said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "People like you always ruin what they touch. It's in your nature. Chaos, clumsiness, inability to maintain standards." He turned to his guests, gesturing dismissively. "This is why you can't trust anyone anymore. No attention to detail, no pride in their work." Elena felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Not in front of these people who would find her humiliation entertaining. "Again, I apologize. It won't happen again." "No," Victor agreed, "it won't. Because you won't be serving this room anymore. Tell your manager I requested someone competent." The words hit like physical blows. Elena nodded once, collected the wine bottle with shaking hands, and left the room with whatever dignity she could salvage. Behind her she heard laughter, Victor's voice carrying, "God, the entitlement these days. Spill wine on a client and expect sympathy." Elena made it to the staff area before the tears came. She'd been humiliated before. Working service meant developing thick skin, but something about Victor's cruelty cut deeper. The casual dismissal, the public shaming, the assumption that she was worthless, forgettable, fundamentally less than. An hour later, after composing herself and finishing her shift in the main dining room, Elena was clearing tables when she noticed something. A leather portfolio left in the private room, forgotten in the evening's chaos. Protocol dictated she turn it into management immediately, but something made her pause. Made her open it, made her look at the contents that should have been far beyond her pay grade. Inside, merger documents, financial projections, shareholder agreements for something called the Coastal Renaissance Project. And underneath everything, one torn page that made Elena's breath catch. An original partnership agreement from 23 years ago, bearing two signatures. One signature belonged to Victor Harrow. The other belonged to James Brooks, her father. Elena's hands started shaking again, but this time not from fear. Her father had died when she was 6. A car accident, her mother had always said, tragic and sudden. But Elena remembered fragments. Her mother's whispered conversations, the way people stopped talking when Elena entered rooms, the speed with which they'd lost everything. House, savings, her father's name. Her mother had never talked about what her father did, what business he'd been in, only that he'd worked with powerful people, and that after he died, those powerful people had forgotten he ever existed. Until now, Elena hadn't known her father had been Victor Harrow's partner, had helped build the empire that Victor now ruled alone. She carefully photographed every page with her phone, returned the portfolio to the lost and found, and went home to her sleeping daughter with her mind racing. There was a story here, buried under years of silence and convenient amnesia, and suddenly Elena needed to know what it was. Elena spent the next week researching, stealing moments between shifts to dig through public records, old news articles, anything that might illuminate the partnership her father had shared with Victor Harrow. What she found was frustratingly sparse. A few mentions of Brooks and Harrow Consulting in late 1990s business journals. A brief notice about James Brooks' departure from the firm, then nothing. As if her father had been carefully erased from the company's history, she was studying her phone during her break, scrolling through yet another dead-end search result, when a voice interrupted her concentration. Looking up Harrow Group, Elena looked up sharply to find Ethan Miller, one of her regular customers, standing with 2 cups of coffee. He was maybe 35, always polite, always tipped well, and always ate alone while working on his laptop in the corner booth. "I'm sorry?" Elena tried for casual, but her voice betrayed her. "I recognize that look," Ethan said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "May I? I promise I'm not being creepy. I used to work for Harrow Group, accountant, 5 years until I started asking questions about discrepancies in the books." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out Victor doesn't appreciate curiosity." Elena studied him, weighing risks against the desperate need to understand. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind that suggests the company's origin story isn't quite what Victor claims. He positions himself as a self-made genius, but the initial capital, the early clients, the foundation, all of that came from somewhere else. Someone else." Ethan pushed one coffee toward her. "I heard what happened last week, with the wine. Victor's an ass, but that was excessive even for him. He said people like me always ruin what we touch. He says that about anyone who threatens him, which apparently now includes waitresses who spill wine." Ethan opened his laptop, turning it so Elena could see. "After I got fired, I kept digging. Call it obsessive, call it revenge, but I wanted to understand what I'd stumbled into. Found this, original business registration from 1998. The document showed 2 names as co-founders, Victor Harrow and James Brooks, equal partners in what would become Harrow Group." "That's my father," Elena whispered. Ethan's expression shifted from curiosity to something more intense. "Your father is James Brooks?" "Was. He died in 2001. I was 6. My mother always said it was an accident, but she never talked about his work, about what happened to his part of the business." "It disappeared," Ethan said bluntly. "Victor bought him out, or claimed he did. But here's what's interesting. I found the original operating agreement, the one that structured the partnership. It has a clause probably common back then, maybe overlooked now. If a co-founder dies, their shares transfer to their estate. But if the company undergoes major structural change, like a merger, before those shares are formally dissolved, any direct heir can claim them by signing the renewal documents." Elena stared at him. "That can't be real. That can't still be valid. It is if nobody ever formally closed the estate, if the shares just sat there, forgotten. Does your mother still have any of your father's papers?" Elena thought about the box in her closet, the one her mother had given her before she died 3 years ago, the one Elena had never quite found the courage to open. "Maybe. I don't know." "Look," Ethan said gently, "I'm not suggesting anything illegal, but Victor built an empire on your father's foundation and then erased him from history. If there's a legal way to remind him that James Brooks existed, that he mattered, wouldn't you want to know?" That night, after Sophie was asleep, Elena opened the box. Inside, photographs of a man she barely remembered, legal documents she didn't understand, and a sealed envelope marked for Elena when she's old enough to understand. Her mother's handwriting. Elena's hands shook as she opened it, finding a letter written in her mother's careful script. My darling girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're finally old enough to handle the truth. Your father didn't die in an accident. He died by suicide, 3 months after Victor Harrow forced him out of the company they built together. Victor found a loophole, claimed your father had violated non-compete agreements, threatened legal destruction unless James signed away everything. Your father couldn't fight back. We had you. We had no money for lawyers and Victor had connections everywhere. So James signed, and then, unable to live with what he'd lost, what he'd let Victor take from his family, he drove his car off a bridge. I never told you because I wanted you to remember him as the man who loved you, not the man who gave up. But you deserve to know that Victor Harrow stole your father's legacy and built his empire on your father's grave. I kept every document, every paper, everything that proves your father co-founded that company. I don't know if it matters anymore, if there's any justice to be found. But if there is, fight for him, Elena. Fight for the man who would have fought for you. Love, Mom. Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, rage and grief tangling into something sharp and focused. Victor hadn't just humiliated her last week. He'd destroyed her father, stolen his work, erased his existence, and built a fortune on the ruins. She called Ethan. I found something, she said, and I think I know how to make Victor Harrow remember my father's name. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Elena worked together, quietly building their case. They found the original share certificates in the box, never formally dissolved. They located the operating agreement with its archaic but legally binding heir clause. They verified that the upcoming Coastal Renaissance merger qualified as the kind of major structural change that would trigger the clause. Most importantly, they confirmed that Victor had no idea who Elena was, had never connected the waitress he'd humiliated with the daughter of his former partner. This is dangerous, Ethan warned as they finalized their plan. Victor will fight back. He has lawyers, money, power. You could lose everything. Elena looked at the photo of her father she'd placed on her dresser. Young, smiling, holding a baby Elena. He took my father's name off the door, she said quietly. But he won't erase it from history. Not anymore. You're walking into fire. She met Ethan's concerned gaze with steady determination. Then let it burn. The Harrow Group's next major board dinner was scheduled for Thursday. The same private room, the same investors, the same Victor Harrow who'd called her incompetent. But this time Elena requested the assignment, and this time she was ready. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Elena dressed carefully in her server's uniform, the documents folded small in her apron pocket, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Ethan waited in the lobby, pretending to work on his laptop, ready to intervene if things went catastrophically wrong. The private dining room glittered with wealth, crystal, silver, the kind of opulence that made Elena's small apartment seem like it existed in a different universe. Victor held court at the head of the table, surrounded by investors in expensive suits, all of them radiating the confidence of people who'd never worried about rent or daycare or whether they could afford both groceries and electricity. Gentlemen, Victor was saying as Elena entered with wine bottles, by the end of tonight, we'll own half the coastline. The Coastal Renaissance project isn't just a development, it's a transformation, and your investment will increase tenfold within 3 years. Elena moved quietly around the table, refilling glasses, invisible again in the way service staff always were. But she was listening, absorbing every detail, waiting for the right moment. It came sooner than expected. You there! Victor snapped his fingers at Elena without looking at her. Bring the contracts. Folder on the side table. Elena retrieved the leather portfolio, different from the one she'd found weeks ago, but containing the same essential documents. Merger agreements, transfer paperwork, the legal framework that would consolidate Victor's empire. She placed it in front of him. Victor opened it with theatrical flair, pulling out the signature page. Gentlemen, this is what power looks like. One signature, and we reshape the city. One of the investors laughed. Always the showman, Victor. That's why we trust you. Trust and vision, Victor agreed. Then noticing Elena still standing nearby, he gestured at the document with casual cruelty. You look curious. Want to see what $1 billion deal looks like? Elena's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. If you're offering... Victor smirked, sliding the paper toward her mockingly. You can't read that, can you? It's far beyond your pay grade. Complex legal language, financial structures, probably looks like gibberish. The room chuckled, investors enjoying the casual humiliation of the help. Elena picked up the document, studying it carefully. And there, in the small print of the shareholder section, she found what she'd been looking for. The language that would trigger the heir clause if an original founder's descendant signed before the merger completed. Actually, Elena said softly, setting down the paper, I can read it, quite clearly. Something in her tone made Victor look up, really look at her for the first time since the wine incident. Excuse me? Elena reached into her apron pocket, pulling out the folded documents she'd carried like armor. The original share certificates, her birth certificate, the letter from her mother, all authenticated and notarized by the law firm Ethan had helped her find. My name is Elena Brooks, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Daughter of James Brooks, co-founder of what was originally Brooks and Harrow Consulting, now known as Harrow Group. The room went silent. Victor's face drained of color. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. James Brooks died 23 years ago. His shares were dissolved. No, Elena corrected, spreading her documents on the table where everyone could see. They were never formally dissolved. And according to the original operating agreement, the one you signed with my father in 1998, if the company undergoes major structural change before those shares are properly closed, any direct heir can claim them by signing the renewal documents. One of the investors, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward to examine the papers. My God, she's right. This is an original share certificate. And this heir clause, Victor, did you know about this? It's archaic, meaningless, can't possibly still be. It's legally binding, the silver-haired investor interrupted. I've seen these clauses before. If she can prove lineage and the shares were never formally dissolved. He looked at Elena with new respect. Young lady, are you saying you want to exercise this clause? Elena picked up the pen Victor had been planning to use for his triumphant signature. You said this paper would change lives, she told Victor, meeting his shocked gaze directly. You were right, just not the way you expected. She signed her name carefully below her father's faded signature from 23 years ago, the ink connecting past to present. The effect was instantaneous. The investors erupted in conversation, pulling out phones to call lawyers. Victor lunged forward, trying to grab the document, but the silver-haired investor was faster. Don't touch that, he said sharply. This just became a legal matter. If these documents are authenticated and they look legitimate, then Miss Brooks just activated a claim to original founder shares. Victor, how many shares are we talking about? This is ridiculous, Victor sputtered. She's a waitress. She can't just... 49%, Elena said quietly, remembering the numbers from the original agreement. My father and Victor were equal partners. He took my father's half when my father died, but he never formally dissolved the estate, which means those shares have been dormant, waiting for an heir to claim them. Another investor whistled low. 49%? Victor, you just lost majority control of your own company. Victor's face transformed from shock to rage. You can't do this. I built this company. Your father was nothing, a junior partner who got lucky. My father was your equal, Elena said, her voice cutting through his bluster. He co-founded this firm, brought the initial clients, provided half the capital. You erased him from history because it was convenient, because dead men can't fight back. But I'm not dead, Mr. Harrow. And I can read just fine. The silver-haired investor was already on his phone. I'm calling my legal team. This deal is suspended until we sort out the ownership structure. If Miss Brooks's claim holds, and I think it will, then any merger requires her signature too. She's nobody, Victor shouted. She spills wine and carries plates. This is extortion. This is justice, Elena corrected. You said people like me always ruin what we touch. But here's the thing, Mr. Harrow. I'm not ruining anything. I'm reclaiming what you stole from my family. What you built your empire on while erasing my father's name. Ethan appeared in the doorway, flanked by two people in professional attire. Miss Brooks, your legal team is here. They'll help you navigate the next steps. Elena hadn't known she had a legal team. Clearly, Ethan had arranged more than he'd mentioned. But she was grateful for the support, for the way it made her claim look less like a desperate gamble and more like a calculated strategy. This isn't over, Victor hissed. You're right, Elena agreed. It's just beginning. But this time, my father's name stays on the door. This time, you don't get to erase the people who built your success. This time, Mr. Harrow, someone remembered that James Brooks existed. She walked out of that room with her head high, documents clutched in her hand, her father's legacy finally acknowledged. Behind her, chaos erupted as investors demanded explanations, and Victor realized his empire was no longer entirely his own. The legal battle lasted 3 months. Victor fought viciously, hiring expensive lawyers to challenge every document, every claim, every detail of Elena's case. But the original operating agreement was ironclad. The share certificates were authentic. And most importantly, Victor had never formally dissolved James Brooks's estate. In his arrogance, in his certainty that no one would ever challenge him, he left a loophole that now swallowed his absolute control. The settlement came in February. Elena received 49% ownership of Harrow Group, enough to block any major decision, enough to force Victor to acknowledge a partner he could no longer erase. The board, impressed by Elena's courage and disturbed by Victor's attempts to hide the company's true origin, offered her a choice: cash out her shares for a sum that would set her family up for generations, or take an active role in the company's direction. Elena chose the latter. I'm not here for the money, she told the board during her first official meeting. I'm here because my father built something meaningful, and Victor turned it into a machine that only serves the wealthy. I want to remember what my father believed in, that business should improve lives, not just extract profit. The board was skeptical. Victor was furious. But Elena had 49% of the vote, and Ethan beside her with the financial expertise to back her vision. Over the following months, the transformation began. Elena reinstated the 15 employees Victor had fired over the years for questioning things, each one a person who'd seen something wrong and been punished for speaking up. She implemented profit-sharing programs, increased wages for the lowest-paid workers, and redirected a portion of company profits to a charitable foundation focused on education and small business development. You're destroying my company, Victor spat during one particularly contentious board meeting. I'm fulfilling my father's vision, Elena corrected, the company you destroyed him for. And here's what's interesting, Victor. We're more profitable now. Turns out when you treat people well, they work harder. When you invest in communities, they invest back. Revolutionary concept. The Coastal Renaissance Project underwent major revision under Elena's influence. Instead of luxury condos that would price out existing residents, they pivoted to mixed-income housing with small business support. Victor hated every decision, but he couldn't block them. Not without Elena's signature, not without the board's growing support for her approach. Ethan became her chief advisor, helping navigate the complex corporate world she'd been thrust into. They worked long hours, often with Sophie doing homework in Elena's new office. Modest by CEO standards, but palatial compared to the apartment they'd left behind. Is this your restaurant now? Sophie asked one afternoon, spinning in Elena's desk chair. Elena smiled, looking at the photo of her father she'd placed beside the window. No, baby, it's our story now. Grandpa James's story, too. She renamed the company Brooks Harrow Foundation, keeping both names visible. People questioned the choice. Why acknowledge Victor at all after what he'd done? Because forgiveness is stronger than revenge, Elena explained to a reporter. Victor hurt my family, but erasing him would make me just like him. Both names stay because history should be honest, not convenient. Victor remained as co-CEO, his power checked but not eliminated. They fought constantly, disagreed on nearly everything, but the company thrived under their tension. Elena brought heart, Victor brought ruthlessness. Together they created something neither could have built alone. The pen Victor had used to mock her, the one she'd held while signing the documents that changed everything. now sat framed in her office beside her father's photo. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that power could shift, that the people you dismissed might be the ones who changed your world. On the anniversary of her father's death, Elena hosted a company-wide memorial. She talked about James Brooks, his vision, his kindness, his belief that business should serve people rather than exploit them. Victor attended, sitting in the back, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he approached her. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology. Victor wasn't capable of that. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that James Brooks had mattered, that his legacy endured despite Victor's best efforts to erase it. "I know," Elena replied simply. The Crystal Terrace restaurant, where Elena had once carried trays and absorbed insults, now hosted the Foundation's annual charity gala. Elena walked through the same hall, but this time as the guest of honor, surrounded by the employees she'd reinstated, the communities she'd helped, the visible proof that power could be redirected toward good. One of her former co-workers, still working as a server, approached with champagne. "Miss Brooks, congratulations on everything you've built." "Thank you," Elena said, taking the glass. Then, because old habits died hard and empathy was learned through experience, she added, "How's your shift going? Are they treating you well?" The server smiled, surprised to be asked. "Very well, ma'am. The new management is different, in a good way." After she left, Ethan appeared at Elena's elbow. "You okay? This has to be surreal." "It is," Elena admitted, looking around the glittering room. "A year ago, I was invisible here. Now I'm supposed to give a speech about empowerment and justice." "You earned it. You fought for it." "My father earned it," Elena corrected. "I just refused to let it stay buried." Months later, the Foundation's annual gala drew national attention. Media outlets loved the story. Waitress becomes CEO, David defeats Goliath, justice served cold over expensive wine. Elena tolerated the attention because it brought visibility to the Foundation's work, but privately she found it exhausting. "How does it feel to own the company?" a reporter asked during the press line. Elena paused, considering the question carefully. "I didn't win a company. I reclaimed a promise. My father believed business could be a force for good, that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. I'm just trying to honor that belief." "And what about Victor Harrow? Are you two able to work together?" "We're learning," Elena said diplomatically. "We have very different philosophies, but we're both committed to the company's success. Sometimes the best progress comes from productive tension." What she didn't say, that she and Victor had reached an uneasy truce, that he'd softened imperceptibly over the months, that working beside someone who refused to be intimidated had forced him to reconsider his approach. They'd never be friends, but they'd become effective partners in a way neither had anticipated. The gala was beautiful. The same chandelier that had witnessed her humiliation now reflected light-off glasses raised in her honor. The same tables where she'd served wine now hosted the Foundation's donors. The same floor where Victor had dismissed her now bore a plaque commemorating James Brooks's legacy. But halfway through the evening, Elena slipped away to a quiet corner, suddenly overwhelmed by the unreality of it all. Ethan found her there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Hiding from your own party?" he asked, offering her a glass. "Just needing a moment. This is all so..." She gestured helplessly at the glamour surrounding them. "I keep thinking about my mom, working 3 jobs after my dad died, about Sophie's daycare bills I used to juggle, about standing in this exact spot a year ago, trying not to cry after Victor humiliated me. It feels like someone else's life." "It's your life," Ethan said gently. "You earned every bit of it. Your father would be proud. I'm proud." Before Elena could respond, Sophie appeared, tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, can we go home?" Elena looked down at her daughter. Still the most important thing? Still the reason she'd found the courage to fight back? Still the center of everything that mattered? "Yes, baby, we can go home. But aren't you supposed to stay?" Sophie gestured at the party. "You're the important person?" Elena knelt to her daughter's level, smoothing hair from her forehead. "The important person is standing right here. Everything else is just context." They said their goodbyes, left the glamour behind, and drove back to the new apartment. Bigger than before, but still modest, still home. Sophie fell asleep in the car, and Elena carried her up, tucking her into bed, marveling at how much had changed while the essential things remained constant. In her home office, on small but sufficient, Elena looked at the framed items on her desk. Her father's photo, her mother's letter, the pen Victor had used to mock her, and Sophie's crayon drawing of the three of them labeled "My Family." Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, interview requests, business opportunities. But Elena silenced it. Tomorrow she'd be the CEO, the symbol, the woman who'd reclaimed her father's legacy. Tonight, she was just mom, just Elena, just herself. The chandelier light from the gala seemed very far away now, replaced by the simple lamp on her desk. But in its warm glow, she could see the last line of her father's signature on the original partnership agreement, now framed beside her own. Two signatures, 23 years apart, connected by blood and determination, and the stubborn refusal to stay erased. Elena traced her father's name gently, then turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Victor's resistance, board politics, the endless work of building something meaningful. But tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that her father's name was finally, permanently, on the door where it belonged. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Sometimes the people you look down on are the ones who rise higher than anyone imagined. And sometimes the pen meant to humiliate becomes a tool of transformation.